and welcome back to the Ocean Life Symposium, hosted by Miss Sherry Goforth. And we're on hour number 2 with Richard Charter. Take it away, Sherry.
Good morning. Good morning, Richard. I'll introduce Richard. Richard Charter is a senior fellow at the Ocean Foundation and also directs the local government OCS coordination program. He's a specialist in advocacy on ocean protection issues, including marine spatial planning, media techniques to secure conservation outcomes, and preventing and mitigating industrial impacts on ocean ecosystems. Richard was involved in initiating and maintaining the 27-year congressional moratorium on offshore oil and gas leasing, which has long prevented new drilling along the U.S. West Coast, the Atlantic coast, and Florida's Gulf Coast, as well as Alaska's Bristol Bay. Richard also helped coordinate the local government support to help bring about the creation of the Gulf of the Farallones, Bank, Channel Islands, and Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuaries. Richard co-produced this year's award-winning documentary about seabed mining, now going viral worldwide and viewable at http colon forward slash forward slash thedeepmovie.org. Currently, Richard is guiding California's coastal local governments as they collectively address the latest onslaught of new offshore drilling initiatives being proposed by the Trump administration, including the sensitive waters off of California and our own Northern California. So, welcome, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. And thanks for everyone for joining us this morning. We're here today because there are some new threats to our coast right here and really all up and down the Pacific coast, particularly in Alaska and in the Gulf. And this only proves that the late Peter Douglas was right when he said the California coast is never saved. It's always in the process of being saved. And never has that been more true than right now. We have a process going on at the Interior Department that is on a direct collision course with our ethic here of protecting our clean coast and our clean coast economy and artisanal sustainable fisheries. Californians remember, I think it all began in 1969 with a blowout on Platform A that Union Oil was trying to operate in the Santa Barbara Channel. And the spill lasted so long and was so bad that it caused Richard Nixon, who was president at the time, to enact some of our nation's most important environmental laws, federal laws. Made an environmentalist out of Richard Nixon. And of course, some of those same laws are being dismantled, weakened, and disemboweled right now as we speak. Offshore drilling is very much back on the front burner in our community. We're facing the release any day now of what's called the 5-year Outer Continental Shelf Leasing Program. What's that? Well, the Outer Continental Shelf is the part of the land that sticks out under the ocean. And a leasing program means that the Interior Department plans over a 5-year period where they're going to lease. And this is the sketch of what was leaked to the Houston Chronicle about 10 days ago, which is every part of the U.S. coastline, the whole Atlantic coast, the whole Pacific coast, all of Alaska, areas that have been protected carefully by activists and local governments and state and federal officials for the last 50 years. This focuses in on the Pacific Current. California is divided into 3 planning areas: Northern California, Central California, and Southern California. And we have some issues of concern, obviously, that we're going to talk about today. How we got here, the past and the present, where we are today. We've had some past efforts and successes. I think there are still some people around that remember the largest public hearing in the history of the United States that took place in sleepy little Fort Bragg in the mid-'80s, where the hearing lasted 23 hours. The Interior Department had to finally shut down the hearing. And when they shut down the hearing, Bonnie Raitt was playing on a flatbed truck out front to 600 people that were still signed up to testify. We're going to have some renewed efforts now with local communities along this coast, and we're passing the baton to the next generation. So as you look at the Northern California, Central California, and Southern California planning areas, we know from past experience where they want to lease. And we have this program that somehow escaped the Interior Department early, about 10 days ago, as I mentioned, and it calls for three of these lease sales in Southern California to occur in 2027, 2029, and 2030. In Central California in 2027 and 2029. And in Northern California, this is a first. This means north of the Sonoma-Mendocino County line in 2029. And that's the one that is immediately in front of where we live. How this document got leaked, we don't know. Things are a little disorganized right now at the Interior Department. It's being run by people who are either former TV stars or they are oil industry executives. So we have knowledge from a past effort to drill here back in the mid 80s that actually shows the high area of industry interest shown on this map in yellow, which would be right off of Point Arena, right off of Bodega Head, immediately adjacent to the 3 Mile State Waters, and also right off of Mendocino Village, and then continuing up into the Humboldt County area, immediately off of Humboldt Bay. So this could not be on more of a collision course with our ocean protection ethic here. We could not be a more inappropriate place from a biogeographic sense. And we are looking at a new announcement this morning out of Interior. It wasn't the 5-year leasing program. You have to get up pretty early to beat these people to the press. But this morning, a proposal was to lease. This is not the 5-year program. This is separate. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill, I have trouble calling it that, but the big bill that was adopted by Congress contains a total of 30 new federal Outer Continental Shelf lease sales. Most of them are in the Gulf of Mexico, and the green light was given in terms of what's called a final notice of sale for the sales in the Gulf of Mexico this morning, and also for a total of 6 lease sales in Alaska's Cook Inlet. We don't know exactly when those are going to happen, each of those 6, but one of them's green lighted now and starting a 60-day comment period. If you've ever spent time in Homer, Alaska, and I have, or in Seldovia across Ketchimak Bay, this is a truly spectacular, cruelly sensitive, lush fishing ground, and probably one of the last places on the planet that should be open to the oil and gas industry. So we have plenty on our plate, and I'm going to focus today primarily on what happens here locally, or what we are not going to let happen here locally, because this is the name of the game. This administration is bound and determined to open as much of the Outer Continental Shelf to the oil and gas industry as they possibly can, and they're moving quickly, deliberately, and the only thing standing between them and our coast is us. We started here with a movement to save the coast on the Mendocino coast, really the Sonoma-Mendocino coast. I was part of a little group called Friends of the Coast. We had to shorten it from Friends of the Sonoma-Mendocino coast because it quickly grew so fast that it was obvious that this issue was not going to be limited to protecting just the Sonoma-Mendocino coast. And as we grew, this logo with a rig and a slash appeared on the front door of virtually every coastal dining establishment, business, and has a flag on many fishing boats. And this quickly spread across the country to other regions as a model. But what we vowed then and what we vow today is we are going to be working together to protect our thriving Clean Coast region that is based, we know, on visitor serving industries and what is today called the blue economy and healthy, artisanal, sustainable fisheries. This is not something that's negotiable. This is something that we are going to stand and defend. Now, the process of leasing these tracts occurs under what is called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. And the OCS Lands Act has in it a provision that grants certain powers, if you will, or certain authority to the Secretary of Interior acting on behalf of the President. And in the law, it specifically says that the Secretary of Interior shall accept and respond to the comments of the governor of an affected state and may accept and respond to the comments of local elected officials. This is kind of the heart of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, because what it means is our governor, whoever our governor is at any given time, they have more to say about what the state position is than anyone else. And the law says they have to be listened to. So earlier this year, when we saw a preliminary draft of the 5-year program that included all of California, all of Oregon, all of Washington, the governors of California, Oregon, and Washington stood together, unified front, what we call the blue wall on the Pacific Current. And this is not just a thing in the media, this is in the law. So the governors, we hope, and will work hard to secure a similar unified standing between the 3 states as we go forward into the next couple of months. Here we know about why we're here and why people come here. We know that we have a proven track record of success. We know that I believe 28 local communities along the California coast have adopted onshore facilities ordinances, including Sonoma and Mendocino counties, that preclude or put to a vote of the people any effort by the oil industry to build any kind of facility to support offshore oil drilling onshore. In other words, the counties control land use planning, as they always have and always will. And so measures were passed by wide margins, either on the ballot or adopted by county boards of supervisors and city councils, that were circulated by a group out of Santa Cruz called Save Our Shores in the mid 80s, and as recently as 5 years ago for Marin County, to make sure that there's no onshore footprint for this industry in this region. This tends to have what's called a chilling effect on the interest of the oil industry in leasing here, and we hope it continues to do so. We also have managed over the years, starting in the early 1980s, to convince Congress, when we had an Interior Secretary who was very controversial named James Watt, Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, this has never been a Democratic or a Republican issue, this is a bipartisan issue, Congress adopted for 27 consecutive years a 1 year at a time legislative moratorium that literally cuts off the funding to the Department of Interior for leasing in certain areas. It began as a moratorium protecting certain areas off of California. It spread to the whole California coast. It then spread to the entire Pacific coast, and later incorporated pretty much all the sensitive areas of the Outer Continental Shelf. This has been a process that was supported by both of the Bush presidencies, protecting this coast. They had their own what are called executive Outer Continental Shelf leasing deferrals. Both Bush administrations accomplished that. And we ultimately here in California created a network of now 5 national marine sanctuaries. Within a national marine sanctuary, Outer Continental Shelf leasing for oil and gas is permanently banned, generally by the designation document, by the regulations, and by, in the case of Monterey, also by legislation that created the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary in the Hurricane Andrew Relief Act in about I believe it was 1998. And we are now looking at this, what we call the string of pearls along the California coast that protects permanently, we hope, the area from roughly Cambria to Point Arena. And south of that, we have the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And just in time, to avoid being stepped on by the new incoming administration in between the first native supported and created national marine sanctuary called Shumash off of San Luis Obispo County in northern Santa Barbara County. So we are uniquely positioned here if the Interior Department respects the federal National Marine Sanctuary Program. Many of the personnel from national marine sanctuaries, including off of California, were forced into retirement earlier this year. So there's still a skeleton crew watching our coast for NOAA, but we saw the people who were our caretakers, really, some of them with 2 decades, more than 2 decades of experience disappear from this regulatory framework. Here in California, within the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, from Point Arena on down to Cambria, we have a series of what are called regulatory zones, which off of Walala, off of Jenner, off of Bodega Head, off of Malinas Lagoon, and right around the Farallon Islands. These are special protections. Even within a marine sanctuary, there's an additional layer of protection. And finally, in addition to that, many of us participated in a process in recent years to create the world's most important and most comprehensive science-based network of marine protected areas in state waters. This is within the 3-mile state waters up to the shoreline. And our coast here is dotted with these. The purpose of them is to make sure we protect the national treasure, obviously, that exists here, but also if one of these marine reserves is destroyed or damaged, the ecosystem itself is wiped out, there will be another marine protected area close enough that will serve as essentially a restoration source of eggs and larvae for various species to restore the one that was damaged. So we not only have a network of protections, we have a redundancy to that network where one marine protected area can actually take care of the next one and help bring it back. And these are really important, and they are dotting our coast, and they happen for unknown reasons to almost directly coincide with the areas offshore that are now being targeted by the oil and gas industry. The irony is this is not a high potential oil reserve area, but the oil industry seems to believe that this is their only chance, that during this administration, they have the opportunity to grab leases that they may, speculatively buy and sell. They trade them like playing cards, or they may proceed and explore now and then not use them until later. But in between and right offshore, our network of marine protected areas are the areas often just 3 miles out in the first federal waters, areas that are now targeted by the oil industry. The reason this is such an interesting place from a biological standpoint is we have to our north, northern Mendocino County, southern Humboldt County, one of the fourth most important upwelling systems in the ocean on the planet. In other words, the winds that we all live through part of the year and sometimes curse if we have yard work that day, those winds are basically bringing up from the deep ocean a nutrient plume, if you will, that is the source of food as the sun shines on that floating plume of food. It serves as a nutrient source for all of the national marine sanctuaries that we're talking about today. So this is a food source and nutrient area that goes beyond pretty much anything on the planet, which explains why it is one of the most important, carefully protected pieces of ocean anywhere on Earth. It's also a UNESCO International Biosphere Reserve, so it has global consequence as well. So what needs to be done now? Well, we have a business community that relies on this clean coast economy. We have an opportunity upcoming any day now for a 60-day comment period on the new 5-year offshore oil and gas leasing program, in which grassroots individuals can comment. This spring, when the comment period first opened up for the early draft of this 5-year program nationwide, we all collectively, and I include many of you, submitted 89,000 comments. That's an unheard of number for something as arcane as a notice in the Federal Register pointing you to a document called regulations.gov. So we will be posting very shortly on every website we have access to how to get your comments in. That comment period has not restarted yet, but that's going to be so important. I can't emphasize that enough. County by county, as in the past, we have a new generation of county supervisors, but they are acting decisively and immediately. And in fact, even though the comment period has not technically started yet, the counties of Humboldt, Sonoma, Santa Cruz, and I believe Mendocino acted this week or may act next week. Next week, Marin, and soon San Mateo, working the way down the coast to expressly by resolution state the county opposition to federal offshore oil and gas leasing and subsea mining, which I'll get to in a minute. So your county officials deserve a pat on the back, and they have an important role to play because their comments can be then incorporated in the comments of our governor when this 60-day comment period expires. We are defending an action taken by the prior administration as recently as January of this year. The Biden administration took an action that we applauded that is called the Outer Continental Shelf Withdrawals. And under a provision called Section 12A of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, a president has the ability to permanently preclude offshore leasing in certain areas. And I'm showing a map now, but if you're listening on the radio, the Biden administration permanently withdrew the entire Atlantic coast, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and the entire Pacific coast, including Washington and all of California, and areas in the North Aleutian Basin in Alaska. Now, because these were permanently withdrawn in January, it complicates the efforts by the present administration to now turn around and lease in those areas. So the oil industry is pursuing a piece of litigation in a oil-friendly court in Louisiana. This originated to try to overturn this. They haven't quite killed it yet, but they're working on it. So we are watching existing protections being threatened. What gets hurt the most when offshore oil comes to your community is obviously fishing. There is what is called the space use conflict. And the space use conflict means you can't fish anywhere near an oil rig, but there's also the idea that pollution, routine day-to-day pollution from the rigs, as well as major and minor routine oil spills, are not compatible with clean fisheries. We probably would first see here, if these areas are opened, the oil industry investing in a speculative way in seismic airgun surveys. This is where a survey ship goes along the surface of the ocean towing what is called an air gun. They used to do it with dynamite. The air gun sends out an even more abrupt seismic signature. And that air gun is a source of shock waves that travel down through the ocean and into the seabed. And those sedimentary rock layers under the seabed bounce back those sound waves to a series of hydrophones in a very long array that's towed behind that ship. The computer then, artificial intelligence here again, creates a three-dimensional model of the seabed. As this airgun activity happens, number one, fishing stops. You have to get out of the area. Secondly, the sound waves travel vast distances in the water column, water being an extremely very good carrier of sound waves. uh, hundreds of miles in some cases. Whales communicate with each other from Alaska to Hawaii or on their way from Alaska to Hawaii. But we call them boom boom ships. Where I live on a point of land in Sonoma County, every time a large industrial ship appears anywhere on the horizon from the Oregon border to San Francisco, my phone starts ringing because people think there might be a survey ship out there doing acoustic bathymetry for the oil industry. Generally, it's not, because the old data that the oil industry has now from what is called two-dimensional seismic was gathered in the 60s, and that's all they have. What they are dying to get their hands on is three-dimensional seismic, which is a more sophisticated, more disruptive technology, and that would start shortly, probably before even a lease sale. I would expect that to be announced shortly after the release of this 5-year leasing plan. And once the comment period closes, we would see permits issued for seismic surveys. The thing that we remember in 1969 in Santa Barbara, we've had our memory refreshed a few times. We had in 2015 the Refugio oil spill, in which a pipeline, which had gotten as thin as an onion skin, and had not been monitored, inspected, or had what's called a smart pig run through it for we don't know how many years, developed a tear in the wall down near Refugio State Beach. And oil started leaking out into a field in a gully inland of Highway 101. This was offshore oil in a pipeline from rigs offshore that was being conveyed to oil refineries in Southern California. The oil spill was a terrestrial oil spill, but the gentleman operating it for the oil company was in Houston in a room with a computer, and he saw a loss of pressure, so he turned up the pressure. He increased the pumping capacity, and more oil came out of the ground, and eventually found its way, unbelievably, found its way through a small culvert that drains under 4 lanes of freeway and a frontage road, and then found its way into the ocean, where it traveled 150 miles on the ocean. Obviously, had there been an oil spill contingency plan, the ability of that oil to reach the ocean could have been blocked by plugging a culvert. I know if I'd been there and I'd had a backhoe, I would have filled the culvert with dirt, drove the backhoe in, and then reported to the Coastal Commission and told them I didn't have time to get a permit, and I'd probably still be in jail or something. But the bottom line is there was no plan. That oil, once it hit the ocean, became subject to ocean currents, which are often unpredictable. Parts of the year they go north, parts of the year they go south. There's a nearshore countercurrent, and spread along that coast. So folks in that area are not in a very good mood right now, and they are fighting a company called Sable, which is trying to restart that pipeline. And this week, the transfer of ownership of that pipeline to Sable was withheld by the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors, and the hearing was postponed. So we don't know what's going to happen there. But even where there has been offshore oil in the past, the memory haunts people of these spills. In Long Beach, I got a call at 3 in the morning. These calls always come at 3 in the morning. A subsea pipeline that served an offshore oil rig. The pipeline was supposed to be buried and cemented in at both ends on the seafloor. It looked like it had never been fully complying with those requirements. And then it appeared that the required shut-in valve on the oil rig that would shut it down if a loss of pressure occurred, both of those didn't happen, or the burial hadn't happened, and the shut-in device, as far as we could tell, was just deliberately disabled, bypassed. And so a ship dragging an anchor into the nearby port appears to have dragged that oil pipeline along the seabed, and eventually it broke and spread along the coast of really Huntington Beach and all down the coast. There had also been an earlier spill, so this kind of caused a flashback, if you will, not the good kind, where the American trader, a tanker serving those same oil sources on that coast in 1990, actually made a hole in its own bow with its own anchor. You can't make this stuff up. And caused what was called the American trader oil spill. I overflew this with a Coast Guard crew. This was a tragic thing that happened in 1990. And these things linger in people's minds. But of course, the one that everybody remembers and the big ticket item that nobody can forget was called Deepwater Horizon. For me, this was another call at 3 in the morning from a gentleman who was trying to find out in the Gulf of Mexico. He said, we have a rig that has exploded, deep water, high pressure reservoir, uh, and there are fatalities, and we need to know where the loop currents are. In the Gulf, there are these very powerful surface currents that are almost like a freeway. And the loop currents, had it caught the Deepwater Horizon spill early on, the loop current could have had that oil on the Gulf Coast of Florida in a matter of 48 hours and then through the Keys and up the Atlantic coast. I, at 3 in the morning here, woke up a friend of mine who does current modeling in the Gulf of Mexico for the commercial and sport fishing industry. And I said, where are the loop currents? And he started, firing up his computers and looking at satellite images. And he said, you're lucky. They're lucky. The Deepwater Horizon spill, at least the origin of it, happens to be away from the current location of the loop currents, which move around in the Gulf. So we got lucky. The oil lingered off the coast of 3 states, 4 states, really counting Florida, for months and continued to leak. I wouldn't call that lucky, but when it finally came ashore, there were very large tar balls coming ashore as far away as Florida. If you look at the footprint of that Deepwater Horizon spill on the Atlantic coast, you could easily see the damage it would have done. You can imagine what it would do here. You would have oil from the Golden Gate to Humboldt County from one spill. And this is a nightmare. And so the really big one was in 1979 called Ixtoc. This was a U.S. company drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. The spill was so large that they tried dumping ball bearings into the blowout. They tried pumping concrete. And finally, the ocean itself caught fire. And it was a spill that lasted 10 months in the Bay of Campeche off of the coast of Mexico. It went on for 10 months. And at the end of the day, today, we still have right now on land in the mangroves along the coast of Mexico tar mats from the Ixtoc spill. So the take-home message is when you have the most pristine, most protected coastline on Earth here, where we happen to be lucky enough to live, you do not want the most catastrophic, long-lasting, often permanent, no technology to control a spill or shut in a blowout. It is the last place that anything like offshore drilling should be allowed. We know about our upwelling, we know about the food source, and we know that we are not going to allow offshore drilling here. As if we didn't have enough trouble, we have in the same administration a seabed mining program that is fast approaching, probably not approaching as rapidly as the offshore drilling program, but seabed mining is coming quickly, and there are 3 kinds of seabed mining, and none of them are good for the ocean, believe me. Seabed mining involves either grabbing these nodules of various minerals that are found spread across the ocean. The area of most interest is between Hawaii and Mexico, and it extends pretty much that far. Its linear extent is wider than the U.S. coast, North America, and this sucks various minerals from the seabed, brings them to a surface ship, pumps the mud and water over the side, and that dewatering plume, as it's called, can travel vast distances in the ocean in a three-dimensional plume and interfere with what's called the diel vertical migration. In the ocean, there are certain creatures that move from the ocean surface to the seabed, and they are a very important part of the carbon cycle. They are an important and absolutely critical part of the way in which the ocean is sequestering a very large increment of the man-made carbon pollution on this planet. In the deep ocean, there are creatures that we are just beginning to discover. We haven't named all of them, and we barely understand how they work. But around the other mining targets, which are more germane here on the West Coast, there are strange and chemosynthetic organisms which actually are susceptible to what are called hydrothermal vents. They live around deep sea hot springs. They live off the minerals and the sulfides and no sunlight. So we live in a world up here where we are living off of sunlight and plants and animals that live off of sunlight. But deep in the ocean, including off of northern Mendocino County, Humboldt County, and extending really all the way up to about Coos Bay, there is a feature called Gorda Ridge. And the former Interior Secretary, James Watt, that I mentioned, who worked for Ronald Reagan, James Watt tried to lease the Gorda Ridge in the early 1980s, and he was met with such a wall of opposition that he gave up, and then he wound up making some embarrassing comments and had to resign. But the Gorda Ridge is probably going to be one of the first or second targets for the new Department of Interior hard minerals leasing program. They are looking at other areas off of American Samoa and off of the Cook Islands. The governor of American Samoa is very concerned about this, has a whole staff working to oppose it there. At American Samoa, the leasing target is right between a national marine sanctuary and a marine national monument. It's like halfway between two of the most designated sensitive areas in the Pacific Ocean. One is a Bush creation, one is an Obama creation. So this issue does not even respect protected areas that were created by a Republican president. Here on the California coast, in recent years, we added a feature off the Big Sur Monterey Bay coast to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary that's called Davidson Seamount. The Davidson Seamount is what's called a spire. It's a vertical feature that sticks up from the seafloor and rises rapidly. It has a very steep gradient. For some reason, the ocean plates these unique and rare vertical spires in the ocean. It plates them with metals, almost like a plating factory for your, bumper of a car or something. And so the Davidson Seamount, even though it's in a National Marine Sanctuary, we would not be surprised if it winds up being a deep sea mining target within the boundaries of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. In the deep ocean, as I mentioned, we're still discovering different forms of life. We know that some of these forms of life, we haven't figured out how they actually work yet or how they live off of no sunlight. There's what's called a marine snow that's filtering down from the ocean surface. Once in a while, if they're having a very good day, they'll get what's called a whale fall, where a whale will die on the surface and fall all the way to the deep ocean. And that whale fall can feed an entire series of communities for a very long time. As you look at the nodules themselves, the seabed nodules that kind of look like a potato spread across the seafloor, each one is a community in itself. Life forms live in the interstitial spaces, in the cracks and crevices of these nodules. There's a gentleman from one of the mining companies that likes to show up at a hearing and hold up one of these modules and say, it's a battery in a rock. Well, it's also a world of life in a rock. And it happens that we know that the life forms of the deep ocean have taken millions of years to grow on this rock. Maybe it was a shark's tooth and it started accreting material around it. And then the biological communities that live on these nodules, they would just be destroyed. And areas where exploration, there's been no commercial seabed mining yet through the agreement among the parties of the UNESCO Seabed Authority. But we know that places where exploration has taken place many, many years later, it looks just strip mined. No, there's no restoring deep sea ecosystems. And the vehicles that actually do it are remotely operated by folks up on the ship who are looking at monitors, trying to move a machine around that can be very large. That's a remote operated vehicle that's sucking up material from the seabed, bringing it to the surface, and then dumping the waste over the side. No way to monitor that. There's not any kind of regulatory regime that would take care of making sure they're not hurting anything down there, harming the ecosystem. We do know that medical discoveries await us in the deep sea. The current COVID testing evolved from discoveries having to do with deep sea life. We don't need to harvest things to turn them into pharmaceuticals for humans. We learn from samples and then we create that compound. And we believe, and many people believe in the pharmaceutical and medical establishment, that the cure for cancer will come from something we learned from deep seabed life. So we know that oil rigs can blow up, that oil pipelines can leak, and we know that where we live in our hearts, and it lives in our hearts, believe me, I'm sure of that because I watched what you all have done over the decades. It lives in our hearts, and we're going to stand to defend it again. We know that Prop 20, the California Coastal Act, began here on the North Coast. We know that that sentiment is alive and well in North Carolina. They kind of copied our logo, but that's fine with me. And we know that there are some positive outcomes within our reach. We, first of all, need to maintain the January 2025 OCS presidential withdrawals done by President Biden under Section 12A of the OCS Lands Act. That may be, and I expect it will be, a protracted legal fight, and we're ready for it. We're going to do that. Second, and this is where you all come in right now, we need to avoid the inclusion of California, Oregon, and Washington in any 5-year OCS program or any other area for that matter. We know that's possible because we have a coalition of Republican members of Congress on the Atlantic coast, including Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, that just got the whole Atlantic coast taken out of the 5-year program last week because they were threatening to renew a congressional moratorium. They literally went to the White House, said, no, you're not going to do this off South Carolina. You're not going to do this off of Maine. And the president just took it out. So we know that the few Republican members of Congress we have here in California are capable of joining with their Democratic colleagues, of which 100 or so in the Congress have now opposed the 5-year leasing program, and we could stop this. To do that requires each one of us. I'm here, you're there. Please follow this issue. And third, we are going to, in the course of commenting on this 5-year program, we're going to work very hard with our legal team to build a strong, unified legal record because we expect that ultimately, if this administration proceeds in the direction they're headed, we're going to need a strong, unified legal record. The things we build into the legal record, the details that only people who live here know, things that meet the requirement of the law to be an obstacle. We're going to throw those all underneath as ball bearings under the wheels of the Interior Department until they leave us alone. And so we will probably be in court, I would anticipate, for several years. We know that oil and gas exploration and seabed mining, either one, can have significant negative impacts on the environment and destroy local economies. We know we have successful past efforts here, and we're going to build on those and expand on those. And right at the heart of it will be your local government to build on successful past efforts. And we know that a unified coalition of local governments, state elected officials, members of Congress, and ordinary citizens and businesses, anything from, visitor serving industry of any kind to the fisheries, can stop this. We've taken a look at the new congressional districts that came about or will come about soon as a result of the passage of Prop 50. And you will note, if you could see the map or you could look at a map online, that the coast of Nevada is now in California. The reconfigured congressional districts give us new opportunities to bring these people who, when it's hot weather inland, they come to the coast. We all know that. We watch them, we feed them, we house them, and we welcome them. And we got a new congressional map that will play a role in what we're going to do to win. This is a technology turning point for society. We had acknowledging that there was a climate crisis. Many people were willing to keep an open mind about offshore wind. If done right, in the right places and done carefully. That has been just absolutely smothered by this administration, that industry, literally smothered. Even solar, any kind of renewables are under assault right now by this administration. Anybody that can show me an adverse impact from rooftop solar, please let me know. So we are at a turning point. We have now among our local governments what is called the Save My Coast Coalition of basically cities and counties that are going to stand up to this stuff. I expect eventually we will build this out the whole length of the California coast. I can't predict, but we're doing great in Central and Northern California. And we're getting a lot of interest from San Diego government, local governments. Pacific Palisades just passed a resolution, and we're going to protect this coast. Thank you, and I will allow questions, or not allow, but welcome questions. If Teresa, anybody there wants to have anything more to say, I'm here, I'm listening, and please share your thoughts.
Thank you, Richard. We do have a little bit of time. I have a quick question. Why offshore oil? What is their rationale for needing more drilling? And what's different about it? Is there a different composition than land-based oil?
No, it's all the same hydrocarbons, no different than land-based oil. I think that the whole Department of Interior jurisdiction over the oil and gas off our shores, and like I say, off California, it's northern Central California, it's a marginal resource. So in order to attract interest on the lease sales that were announced that I mentioned earlier this morning, and the big, not so beautiful bill, the Interior Department actually had to lower the royalty rate to 12% in order to get anybody to be interested. Kind of interesting that they have to pay the oil industry to take the leases. This is a matter of principle, I think, by an administration that has been infiltrated by the oil and gas administration, oil and gas industry, Freudian slip. And as the oil and gas industry gained control of our government, they had a wish list. They've been developing that wish list for a long time. And at the top of that wish list were the areas, particularly areas that have been protected in the past by a congressional moratorium. And then right at the middle of that is Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt Coast. no question. So it's because they can, is the answer.
Okay. Yeah, and we need more oil because we're importing, we have our own, but we buy from Canada. And I don't have a thorough understanding of the oil community, but again, it's just because they can. And there's profit to be had, is that essentially?
Well, it's interesting that since this administration began weakening protective regulations that take care of the environment and even making it even easier for terrestrial drilling, like in New Mexico or on land anywhere, that the oil industry can't keep up. The oil industry, their threshold right now, I believe, is about $60 a barrel. If you can't make money, you won't drill anyway right now. So I think here there's a glut of oil being produced in the U.S. That really leans us toward the speculative nature of leases that might be let now off our coast. It's possible they won't be developed anytime soon. But once they're there, you don't buy back leases. You never get them back. This is a one-way ticket. And there are a couple of cases where the conservation community has fought so hard that companies voluntarily relinquish leases after 20 years or so. Outer Banks in North Carolina, there were small area lease ones. They gave up the leases. Area in Bristol Bay, North Aleutian Basin, and in Alaska, they were sued for so long that eventually they quit fighting and gave up the leases. But only under the pressure of long-term litigation, and the industry had just given up because it was too expensive to keep trying. But the actual agency, the Department of Interior, has never taken back leases, not even the Deepwater Horizon lease. It's still an active lease, and it's a desert around it from all the dispersant and the tar that's still there. But you don't even take back a lease when you've had a Deepwater Horizon. If you're the Interior Department, that's an active lease.
Okay, well, to finish up here, we just have another minute. Richard, we'd like to thank you for making time and to present this valuable insight into our urgent need for action to protect our coasts, our home, from the very real threat of offshore drilling. And we want to thank you again and again for your dedication and continued fight against basically political and politics and big money. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing the Ocean Life Conference every year. It's a real blessing to this area.
Oh, you are too, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks again.
Bye.
This is Emily from Sutras Yoga.